This is the Earth. It's all we have. Over 8 billion people live on this planet, and from it we draw the resources we need, not just to survive, but to flourish. But it's not infinite in its abundance. We face scarcity, not just in natural resources, but in time and energy. The great economic problem that we must solve is how to make the decisions that must be made. Scarcity forces us to choose how we will use our resources. Even if we have a lot of something, when we use it for something else, we've constrained our possibilities because it's no longer available for other uses. Choices imply costs. The opportunity cost is the value of what we give up when we make a choice. When you see someone waste food or water or some other resource, it's disappointing because we know there were alternative uses for those resources. We could have had more of something else. That is the opportunity cost of our choices, the value that is foregone. So the big question is, how should we allocate our resources? I think it's uncontroversial to say that we shouldn't waste them. We should try to use our resources in a way that satisfies as many human wants as possible. We want to maximize the value we get out of our resources. In 2022, an outbreak of bird flu swept across the United States, killing tens of millions of egg laying hens and leading to increased scarcity of eggs. How should society respond to this? How do we deal with the reality of having far fewer eggs? Should we limit who gets eggs? Should we limit how many eggs people can buy in the store, or limit how many eggs restaurants are allowed to buy? What about mayonnaise producers and others who make their product using eggs? Sometimes pretzels are covered in egg wash before they're dipped in salt. Should we stop people from buying eggs for that reason? Eggs can even be used in soap, paint, shampoo, leather polish. Some dog foods have eggs in it. Should we keep the eggs for human consumption only? How do we deal with this problem? Throughout most of history, these problems were solved by economic centralization. Production of important goods was controlled by bureaucrats, then called pharaohs and kings and lords and vassals, who then rationed the product out to people. Without planners, people were afraid that there wouldn't be enough for everyone, or that greedy people would hog too much of it. And of course, this kind of thing still happens today. Attempts to ration eggs by limiting purchases were one way to keep eggs on the shelves. Does it work? Modern centrally planned economies, like the Soviet Union, tried to do this with a wide array of goods. Production was controlled by the state, and producers were given strict production quotas they were pressed to meet. Then the state distributed what was produced. The credo was from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. But the Soviet economy failed to use resources efficiently. Quotas were not met or they were circumvented. There's a story of a shoe factory that was pressured to increase production, as measured by the quantity of shoes they produced. However, the factory was a bit short on materials. So, to increase production, the factory decided to produce more children's shoes, which require less material. Eventually, there was a severe shortage of adult shoes, especially in larger sizes. However, the factory was still meeting its production goals on paper and had no reason to change their behavior. Centralized economies fail because there's too much information to process and no incentive to change behavior when it's not working. There are too many details to keep track of, and it's too difficult to know all of the opportunity costs. A Soviet planner might deal with an egg shortage by keeping eggs stocked on the shelves at stores but limiting their use in other food production or by restaurants. But people might have more ways to work around an egg shortage than restaurants or other food producers do. It really depends on what substitutes are available. Without a good mechanism for determining what the most valuable uses of eggs are, rationing and other methods of central planning will result in shortages, and people won't be able to get what they need. This just isn't a problem in a well functioning market economy. In market economies, prices tell us the opportunity cost to society. When markets set prices, they identify what the most valuable uses of a product are. See this on the graph for supply and demand. Price is on our vertical axis, meaning this is the axis which measures value. And quantity is on the horizontal axis, which tells us how many eggs there are. Where supply and demand cross is the equilibrium, and the forces of competition will drive the market price of eggs to this equilibrium. But there's a lot hidden by this little diagram. At this market price, only people who are willing to pay that price or more will buy eggs and have their demand for eggs satisfied. Their willingness to pay indicates that these are the highest value uses for eggs in society. People using eggs for special occasions or to make the most delicious food will be the ones willing to pay the most. But there's a huge group of people who want eggs and aren't getting them. That is the unsatisfied demand down here, where people are willing to pay something for eggs, but not as much as the market has priced them. But why is it that they're not willing to pay very much for these eggs? It's because their uses for eggs don't provide much value. There are alternatives they can turn to which do almost as good. And so prices don't have to get very high for them to prefer turning to those alternatives. Right here, where supply and demand cross, is the margin between these two things. You could think of it as the lowest valued satisfied demand or the highest valued unsatisfied demand, because there's very little difference between those things at this point. But this is the bar being set by society. Only people who have higher value uses for eggs than this are going to buy eggs, while the rest turn to alternatives. And those alternatives are valuable. These are options which people find to be better than eggs when the price of eggs is high. When we choose to use eggs, we give up the opportunity to use these alternatives instead. When eggs are scarce, we want people to turn to these alternatives. Of this is that prices incentivize people to economize their choices. If eggs become more scarce, we want people who can easily switch away from using eggs to do so, while those who can't end up getting the eggs. The market works to find the price, which incentivizes people to do this on their own. If it settles on a price of $7 for a dozen eggs, those who can easily replace eggs with something else will have a big incentive to do so in order to avoid paying that high price. But those who can't easily replace eggs need to prove it. And only if they get more than $7 of value from their dozen eggs will they choose to actually go forward with buying them. In this way, the market penalizes those who want to use up our scarce resources and rewards those who don't use up our scarce resources. It may sound harsh, but it's still true even if eggs are 10 cents per dozen, because the villain is scarcity. Without scarcity, everything is free. But in a world with scarce resources like ours, if you want to use resources, you must pay their opportunity cost. During the 2022 outbreak of bird flu, markets did their job and the price of eggs soared. It isn't pleasant. No one wants to pay more for eggs, but it solved the problem in many different ways. A higher price encouraged people to seek out alternatives and allowed entrepreneurs to find better ways of helping consumers avoid eggs. Just Egg, which makes an egg substitute using beans, ran advertisements emphasizing their function as a substitute. High prices for eggs and meat are why Eat Just, the company behind Just Egg, was able to raise investor funds and start the business. High prices encourage innovation, and innovation helps keep prices low. It's a virtuous cycle, and that's why we don't want to artificially keep prices low. When markets set prices, they provide an incentive to improve. And of course, higher prices for eggs worked. Instead of the empty shelves found in places where the price was not allowed to adjust upwards as needed, places where the price was allowed to adjust still had a bounty of eggs available for everyone who wanted them. If the credo of a centralized economy is from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, The credo of the market economy might be everyone who's willing to pay for what they use should be able to get what they need.